Hello, and welcome to this ITPro live panel session. I'm Jane McCallion, Features Editor at ITPro, and joining me today to try and answer the question, why does everyone hate security, are Stu Peck, Director of Cybersecurity Strategy at ZeroDayLab, Audra Simons, Director at Forcepoint Innovation Labs, Kevin Fielder, CISO at Just Eat, and Killian Faughnan, CISO at William Hill Group. Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Hi, Jay.
Hi.
So, Audra, if I could kick off with a question for you. Many security practitioners, they complain that users see them as a roadblock to what they want to do, it's just a bit of a frustration to them getting their jobs done. Is this something that you have experienced?
Oh, absolutely, Jane. So what I see from my experience is traditional threat blocking and statistic assessments really do introduce frictions into the business, into the process, into getting our jobs done. And at the same time, they overwhelm security analysts with millions of alerts of potential threats. And the frictions tend to be kind of like end users trying to make, the best of a bad situation. They create workarounds to get their work done, and they may use things like circumvent the ban on USB drives by actually using cloud storage providers to enable them to work from home, which is rather topical at the moment. But at the end of the day, the employee is actually trying to get their job done, and the IT department that are challenged with trying to keep business process and policy in place. So it's definitely there. It's definitely a problem, and I actually think to get it right, we need to think about how security products are implemented and managed, and look at, so if we take into consideration, like Cloud Access Security Broker is a good example. So well, it will often flag kind of effectively unsanctioned or unknown kind of shadow IT that people are using. IT just want to outright block it. And the problem with outright blocking it, they're not questioning why are users using it. So are they doing it because our processes are broken? Are they doing it because they don't have tools to do their job? And I just think that, rather than banning these outright, security and IT teams should examine why these are being used and understand the true risks. So try to look to enable users and what they're trying to do rather than banning them. And with this suggestion, I'm not proposing that, security let go, of all control, because we need control still. But, if we approach security by actually looking at understanding, what data needs are, and like the data that really needs strong protection and how users should interact with it or should not interact with it, then through doing that, we can actually reduce the business friction, for users and cut the unnecessary alerts for security teams. So I'm just thinking, if this was enabled by CISOs and CIOs, to reduce traditional security friction pain points, this would enable productivity better, and the time that it takes to actually detect and mitigate risk.
And what about the rest of the panel? Is this also something you've experienced, this problem of users finding you to be a frustration and a roadblock?
I think Audra kind of hit the nail on the head, right, which is most people are genuinely trying to do a good job. And it's about us understanding what they're trying to achieve and how do we help them achieve it. I think often security doesn't necessarily understand the wider context. I guess taking it a little bit further, obviously that was kind of, that's a lot of end user kind of stuff, but also whether you're talking to your product teams or your wider tech teams, your organization's mission probably isn't security unless you work for a security company. It's, in my case, they want to give an awesome experience to consumers, get them their dinners, those kind of things, help restaurants. That's the passion of the business. So how do I help enable that passion? Not how do I help slow that down? And I think having that mindset of being a much more business-focused security team really helps you. And if you're just running around going CPS 10 and you shouldn't do this, people are going to not have a lot of time for that. If you get involved as early as possible and help them go with the kind of attitude of, what are you trying to achieve? How do we help you achieve that and understand their goals, not just exactly what they're trying to do? I think you get a lot further.
Yeah.
I think
and Kevin, actually, oh, sorry, Killian, carry on.
I think it's something in the reduction of friction, because in certain parts of our business, and we're like Kevin, different business, but the goal isn't security, right? The goal is driving value for our customers. And where we have dedicated resource to work with product teams or to work with channels, we've seen that, security isn't a hated part of the business anymore. They're a value contributor, and we don't just work with the business on security controls, but we leverage our expertise in things like content delivery networks and migrations to cloud services and all this other stuff, because we have the capabilities, but we need the resources to do that, because it's relationships are where we fall down a lot of the time, I think. And the problem is, when you have so many things to do, you don't have time to build relationships. And when people are coming at you with 1,001 things you need to deliver, the first thing that goes is maintaining and managing those relationships, which makes a huge impact on how you're viewed, obviously.
I've got a slightly different perspective, sort of being a consultancy-led organisation. So we engage with organisations and try and look at it from an outside-in perspective, and looking at the kind of larger picture around information security. And I do a lot of training and engagement exercises. And you're absolutely right. I think everyone said that security shouldn't really be a blocker. It should be an enablement exercise in terms of how do you enable something to progress? How does that meet the business objectives? How does that, how do you ensure that security is kind of built into the beginning? It's kind of if you can engage with someone at the beginning of the project, it's more likely to cost less to fix it at the end. It's trying to work with that team or that organization, or trying to work with the management structure to kind of highlight the security risks and try to get that kind of built from the top down, which is not always easy, right? I think it depends on the organization. Some companies, security is paramount to what everyone does, and it's baked into everything. And then some other organizations, it's slightly less so, and it's trying to help kind of get that message across and try and help, work out, where to build security into those kind of processes, what teams to engage with and how to engage them. So that's quite important.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kevin, to your mind, does the average user kind of have what you would class as an acceptable level of awareness around cybersecurity? And if not, how far away are they from it?
So that's really hard, but I mean, I'm kind of big advocate getting away from the term awareness. I've coined some very poor English that awareness doesn't equal careness. But the reality is, we've got a whole industry making people aware, but not making people care, right? So it's much more about how much they care. I think most people know they should try and do things safely, and they shouldn't be using data and working on a home computer. But equally, as we know, people want convenience and speed, and they want to be able to do a good job, and that's what's paramount to them. So I think there's a reasonable amount of awareness. I think we've got a huge amount of broken things, right? If email was built safely and securely, and everyone implemented all of the DMARC and DKIM and everything properly, you'd have much less problem with phishing. We expect people to spot phishing emails and don't click on this link of this super well-crafted mail. It's like, we have expectations that I think are far out of whack of what people should be dealing with. How many people listening in could, hand on heart, take their car engine apart and fix it? The expectation of driving your car is you get it MOT'd every year, you get it serviced, and you get new tyres fitted and stuff. But you will get other people to do that. The expectations of you are very low, because they don't expect you as a person that does X, Y, and Z to be an expert in all things car. So why do we expect someone who's passionate in finance, or who works in the people team or legal team or whatever else, to be massively passionate and an expert in security? We need to build systems that protect people much better than we do now, I think. So I think it's an industry issue, much more than it is a human issue, a people issue, an end user issue, sorry.
What does the rest of the panel think about this? To your minds, is there a level of acceptable security awareness amongst users? Such as myself. Indeed, I'm not a cybersecurity professional.
I think
sorry, let you go first.
You go first, go on.
Are you sure?
Okay. I'll let you go first, go on.
The level of cybersecurity awareness amongst the average employee at a bank would probably be higher than that of an average employee at a school, but they would also probably be lower than that of a military employee. So it really depends what kind of businesses you work in as to your level of cybersecurity awareness and how much it is part of the culture of your business. So I don't know. I'd say, like, if if an organization's cybersecurity is only as strong as the weakest link, then it's quite crucial to empower all employees, to give them a reason to be diligent and encourage employees to, question requests, double check on record, and, to be a little more cautious in order to actually improve your overall cybersecurity posture. And I would say in my engagement with our customers, it's pretty variable. So even people sort of every day, we work on the internet, we work with technologies, we work with applications, and because of the fact we do that so much, both in our personal lives and at work, people feel safe and kind of comfortable, and they actually forget to question. And so by encouraging employees to take a proactive approach on security and giving them the confidence to raise their concerns, they might, like with effective training, organizations can actually use them as their front line of, cybersecurity defense. So I see it is a question on users, but it's a question of users empowering or enabling them to actually question when things seem a bit strange, rather than just continuing with the business process.
Yeah.
I think I'll add a little bit to that. So from being a kind of social engineer and spending a lot of time doing sort of phishing campaigns, telephone phishing, all those break into buildings, all that kind of great stuff, right? Awareness to me, that's a whole story, but awareness to me is obviously a good measurement factor, and so training is important, but also having the right tools and the right engagement and the confidence for people to report stuff. So if you've got the balance right between testing resilience against phishing or whatever it may be, social engineering or other types of attacks, and the right reporting mechanisms where users feel confident they can report these things, that's what we should be measuring. So like a phishing exercise, you want to measure, of course, the number of people that click on a link, for example, because you want to understand your exposure ratio, but also you want to measure the number. Actually, most importantly, you want to measure the number of people that reported it, either clicked on it and reported it, or people that didn't click on it and reported it, because that gives you an effectiveness of training. Obviously, phishing is a really weird thing for me because you can send 3 different phishing emails and different people will click on it. So it's not really a measurement of success of a campaign or not, but it does give you some kind of yardstick to work with to kind of build upon training or just levels of engagement with the business. How you would deal with this in a real world situation if your controls failed.
I think the phishing was a good example of talking to the business about what they need from security as well. Because obviously we all run phishing campaigns. I'm sure everyone watching runs phishing campaigns. But for the most part, the biggest challenges won't be the phishing campaign. It'll be the mail which comes through which says, "Hey, it's your boss's boss's boss. I need you to send 10 grand to someone today." And the real whether or not people are aware is whether that person will pick up a phone and ring someone. So, you need to plan out even security awareness things. And this comes back to resource as well to a certain degree. It's not, you need to have time to go and talk to these people, and relationships is what it comes down to. Talking to your finance teams and understanding what their concern about phishing is, because it's not going to be the same as ours. We're obsessed with clicking links, but £500,000 quid will go missing, and that won't be because someone clicked a link. That will be because someone didn't pick up a phone. So it's thinking beyond the standards which we do set. I think we do set these things as minimal viable security standards because you have to do a sort of lowest common denominator approach to get the best output for the most people. But you still need to kind of think about spikes where there are additional significant risks, and that requires talking to people and understanding their needs from our security awareness training, and their needs in terms of security awareness separate from our desire for them to be security aware. I suppose it comes back to the care thing, right? If people care about it, they'll come and talk to you and say, "Do you know what?" And we had one. This springs to mind because we had one recently who came and said, "That phishing stuff's great. Do you think you could run specialized campaigns from my team around picking up the phone to verify transactions?" I said, "Yeah, that's brilliant. Let's do it." But it requires the care.
Yeah, so I think you made a couple of great points there around the things like picking up the phone, right? So I think the other thing we do is we overcomplicate it. So it's that simple. If you get a request to do something from a senior person in the organisation, they're never going to mind if you give them a quick call, say, "Are you sure you want me to transfer that £500,000 quid, right?" So having that kind of culture where just those a few things, are you expecting this request? Give them a call. So unless their phone and their email's compromised, you're probably pretty safe at that point. Those kind of simple messages are what's key, not a lot of the complex stuff I think we get caught up in. And like you say, the culture of being able to report stuff, so not being concerned that there's going to be any kind of blowback if you ask a question, is this legitimate or not?
Yeah, because
I think also having it.
Okay. Sorry, you get to go first this time.
Oh, do I? That's lovely. I wanted to make a very small point. I think also it's about. I lost my train of thought now, but it was also about. The simple things are always the easiest, but also having it documented as well. Policy, process, people actually understanding a very simple process that someone can follow. Because then, for example, we see hundreds of these things, right, where people try and call up and change payment details from suppliers, all that kind of stuff. Exactly. Real simple attack that still works, right? It still works in many organizations because they haven't got segregation of duties, so they haven't got that due diligence, so they haven't got that process. So it's as much about the technology controls, it's also as much about having the process documented and actually not deviating from that process. So if someone does call in to say we're a supplier, is that trust but verify? Let's verify this actually happening before we trust, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's actually important. And the other very brief point to make about the awareness piece as well is that people are still not aware of their digital footprint and how that can be used against them. Seeing as I spend a lot of my time doing internet dumpster diving, the amount of stuff that I can find on a company and individuals and execs that can be used in a legitimate attack is so important. And so it's about also not what you do at work, but also how your personal profile, digital footprint can be used against you, and that isn't really talked about as much as say the phishing attack, which is a legitimate attack vector. But if I can get access to other accounts and you haven't got the right protections in place and use that as an attack vector, then the attackers will always go for the least common denominator, the one that's easiest to get into as well.
Excellent. And Stu, I'd just say you covered exactly what I wanted to talk about, because majority of when I've been out with customers and large groups of customers, and I'm asking what problems do you see most often, the majority of them all came up with suppliers phoning to change their payment details, and 50% of the time, like some of them, and that's extreme, but 50% of the time saying it wasn't the supplier doing it. And thankfully, some of the time people challenged it, but in some cases they didn't.
So, I mean, could there be some variation by sector almost? You bring up, Audra, the idea that teachers may not be as cybersecurity aware as, say, people working in financial services, but presumably they'd, kind of have an idea of, you mustn't let just anybody walk through the door or pick up somebody's documents, that kind of thing. But they might be more inclined to click on a link that claims to be from the Department of Education, or similarly, somebody working in military, might be more happy to speak to somebody out on the street who's actually kind of going for that kind of angle. So do companies need to, and this is kind of, Audra, I'll take your answer first if you think, but anybody, it's an open question. Do we need to think on a kind of sectoral level of what, not what your users know, but what they don't know?
And I think we absolutely do have to have that. There are some things that are common across all businesses, like protecting users and data. But then as you go into individual verticals, certain things will be more important, like ensuring kind of regulatory compliance in the behaviors, or in schools, much more physical security and not allowing people to wander off with random children and things like that. So I absolutely think that verticals come into it, but at the basics, when you're just looking at, okay, what do I need to protect? What is my most important data? And kind of ensuring that that's in place. That's common for all businesses. That's common. But I agree. There's definitely a vertical for certainly military, school. Go on from there. But there are definitely different things that would be of a concern.
Yeah, I slightly ripped off your list there, but one of the other things that came to mind is, as we get to reopening, organizations that normally wouldn't store an awful lot of customer data are being asked to store more in order to help with track and trace. So, for example, we might get into a situation where a waitress doesn't know that she's not supposed to, if somebody calls up and goes, oh, can I just double check that you've got the right address for me? And not know that you're not necessarily supposed to give out that information because it might not be the customer who claims it is. Do we need to? Is this another aspect that's coming in? With COVID, with greater emphasis on GDPR, that we need to think beyond the people who we might have done previously, and that it needs to be a company-wide or organisation-wide, irrespective of whether you're the managing director or you sweep floors, wash the dishes, or whatever.
I think there needs to be like a baseline.
Yeah, like there needs to be some commonality of, like GDPR, how do you treat people's data? How do you collect it? How do you store it? How do you keep it? Like, and why and for how long? I think those basics need to be respected. Also, who do you share it with? So who in your supply chain? Because even kind of track and trace, there's going to be a supply chain in track and trace. Like, how do you share that data? And how do you ensure when you're done with the data, it's removed?
Yeah. Are there any other thoughts on this from anyone else?
Sorry, I interrupted. Apologies. I thought it was an open question.
It is an open question, Stu.
Yeah, there needs to be an established minimum baseline that you need to have across all sectors. So cyber hygiene is quite important. That it's also making it appropriate across. You want to kind of allow this to people to take this home with them, so they can kind of think about their families and think about how they can increase their kind of awareness across. I don't like that term as well. How they can improve their cyber hygiene. Let's call it that for now, right? Making sure they're doing the minimum things. They're not reusing passwords. I mean, the amount of times that we all talk about reusing passwords, but how many times is that a compromise in an account? Making sure they've enabled 2FA across all their accounts, making sure they're not using the same email address for everything. They're not using work email addresses for personal stuff. So if they get those kind of non-work sites get compromised, they've exposed their work email address. There's kind of a minimum baseline that we need to try and achieve across every sector, and then there's going to be kind of company threat model specific things that you want to look at that can be more related to the types of data that you're storing, the type of organization you are, your kind of attraction factor to attackers, and then they're applying the controls around that allows to kind of reduce that risk. There's always going to be that. It's never easy. It's never easy to implement, but every company is going to have a different exposure factor based upon their size, the data they store, the type of industry they operate in. They're going to be those common things across the industry they're going to see, and then there's going to be company specific ones. So trying to create a minimum baseline that kind of deals with a lot of those common challenges and then deals with the specific ones is probably where I would kind of lean towards. Yeah.
Actually, Stu, my next question is for you as well. So, all of this, the idea that we have, coming back to the idea that we spoke about previously, friction between between the security teams and between end users. We can't lay all of it at the door of the security team to just make sure that the users get the right information, make sure that they kind of are happy with us. What can the organization at a kind of higher level or a broader level do to bring about a bit more understanding between security teams and users?
Okay, so it's
nice, easy
a difficult one. Nice easy one, right? To solve the problem in one sentence. I think it's from my experience, having been again, this is coming from someone who's brought in to help externally. So obviously, I know that Killian and Kevin will have their and I guess Audra have their own experience as this. But from my perspective, what I've seen and what I've kind of been involved in, it's kind of trying to understand, there's across the business, there'll be kind of processes which work and engagement that works. So, the common things that I see is about sort of developers, for example, is a great place to start. So actually getting, involved with the development team to train and to engage and to try to get them to engage with security as part of that process. So looking at things like DevOps and then moving towards a DevSecOps model to try and get security baked into a process or procedure and training and kind of and a framework that they can work towards and kind of improve. In the kind of infrastructure world, it's going to be slightly more different, looking at security architecture, and it's probably a bit more established. But when you start moving into the kind of cloud environments, it's about how do you make sure that you're enabling all those controls and from a macro level, that's obviously quite common, but it's actually trying to get that message across, which is always quite difficult because it's company specific. Every company is going to have a different risk acceptance culture, risk threshold, security culture, if you want to call it that, where their level of understanding is really down to what they're willing to accept, what the business is willing to accept, and how does that align to their goals. So every company is going to have a different maturity level around their understanding of security, and therefore that translates into how engaged the people are, right? So it really kind of stems from how the business is operating and how the business is aligning, as Kevin rightly said, is how does security support those business goals? If there is an intersection where they're not really aligned, there's always going to be friction. So it's trying to turn that on its head and say, well, how does security support this? What is it the business actually doing? What's the strategy? And how does security support that strategy, align to that strategy? And actually, how does everything then filter down from there? Because if everyone's moving in the same direction, then things are more likely to work. Hope that makes sense. I kind of went off on a tangent.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's going back to, I guess, the title of the section, right, which is around why do people hate us. I think that's one of the things security teams have to get their head around, which is every organization has a risk appetite. So we as security folks are always like, you shouldn't do that, it's got risk, it's insecure, blah, 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 blah. But for the organization, if they have a risk tolerance, and sometimes that goes up or down. So take the current working from home example, right? If you were predominantly an office-based organization and your options were get people working from home quickly with a bunch of risk, or your organization disappears, your risk appetite would have been pretty high at that point because it was a stark choice. And now you've settled into that, the risk appetite will be coming down and you'll be remediating some of those issues. So as a security team, we have to understand that risk appetite is there and it will vary. So a lot of our role is to inform people of the risks, and then they can take educated decisions based on knowing what the risk is and what the likelihood of impact is. And they won't always choose to fix stuff. They'll choose to get to market quickly, or they'll choose to do certain things that we might not agree with. And obviously, at the point when it becomes too disparate, that's when you may look for a different organisation. But we have to be cognizant of that risk appetite piece in our communications with the organisation, and not be the team that's constantly ranting about security risks and issues if they're well within tolerance and people are aware of them.
Yeah, you also see a lot of overcompensating controls as a balance as well.
Yeah.
You kind of deal with, this project hasn't delivered on the stuff we need, so we know next time you won't fulfill the requirements. So for the next one, we're going to go way over the top, so that we kind of get some balance more in the middle, and it just generates more friction. But I think Stu touched on some important points there with the developer community as well. Like we shouldn't be. We should be automating this stuff. I mean, we shouldn't be having conversation about this. It should be part of the pipeline. It shouldn't be a conversation more, and the same is true for things like patching. I don't know about everyone else, but every time I start a new job, I always end up having to go fix some patching somewhere. You kind of figure at some point that should be solved. I think some of these things are problems everywhere, and they detract away from the stuff which lets us add value. That you end up spending a lot of time on this stuff, which is common problems, and you're not solving things which would deliver value to the business and let them move faster, and you end up, burning cycles which you don't need to. So I on the question of why the business hates security, I don't think they hate security. I think most of them are apathetic, to be honest. And then you have a bunch of people who get caught in the grinder for those things where we suddenly decided to pay a lot of attention to it, whereas we're not paying attention to some of the other stuff elsewhere. There's overcompensating controls. Right?
Excellent. Personally, I think that in terms of how organizations can work more closely with users and to build understanding, to kind of build on top of kind of where people are comfortable in their risk tolerance and so on, I think it has to be a company-wide approach. So it needs to be a top-down, cross-functional approach where the organization is not just kind of going, this is an IT problem, and this is where we need like there are implications and responsibilities across all departments. So everyone needs to feel that they own this. And everyone also needs to be sitting there and kind of going, cybersecurity risk is business risk. So therefore, all departments need to be involved and have like strong partnerships, particularly between like human resources, legal and technology departments in order to make this work. And I also think one thing that quite often is missing is really having that trust and transparent communications with users. So organizations need to be open and honest with their employees and ensure that, you know, they're working across all functions, but everyone actually knows how they own this. And, you know, when implementing a security framework, as well as implementing, like all of you guys will recognize this, when you implement a new solution, you actually need to have users to buy into this. So when implementing a security framework, which balances protection with freedom to get their jobs done, you need to engage directly with employees as key stakeholders. So the users, you need to take them on the journey with you. And then they'll hate you less.
It's not totally unlimited, just less.
Just less.
I think that's a really great point for kind of almost anything you're trying to achieve, though, isn't it? Is taking people on that journey. So often when you've had an idea, you've got it worked out in your head, you go, bam, let's go do this. And everyone's like, oh no. But if you kind of take them on the journey and spend a little while circulating that idea and that story, and then a few months later, when, hey, let's do this. Like, hey, we've been talking about that for ages. That's a great idea. So I think I think for doing any kind of big project or change, taking people on that journey and appreciating the time it takes people to come on board with change is something that it will benefit anyone in pretty much any area, not just security.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. It's the only way I'm successful with innovation. Everyone has to come along with me.
Yeah, I think there is stakeholder management. So we all do stakeholder management, you know, part of the day-to-day. I suspect that that's something we need to train people on further down the stack. In a lot of organizations, stakeholder management isn't broad-based. It's internal. It's downwards. It might be with a bit of a peer group. But I think if organizations spend more time on that stakeholder engagement, as Kevin was saying, as Audra was saying, around talking to other parts of business, to bring them on that journey. So it's not just your heads of, it's not just people who run department, but it's architects, you know, who go out and understand that they need to talk to business stakeholders and this stuff, and they bring people on the journey and, you know, back channel and get things ready. You know, the same things you do when you talk to the board, right? You make sure everyone's happy what you're going to say before you say it.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah.
No,
I agree with that.
Something to push down a bit, maybe.
And Killian, actually, I want to circle back to something that we were speaking about just now as a group, with the idea of phishing employees and red team type tactics, testing users' security nous. Now, this has come into the spotlight recently. Some users have been saying it's not fair, it's trickery, effectively. Do these kind of things, are they a viable educational tool or for internal and indeed external teams, or do they just rub people up the wrong way and build animosity?
I'm actually quite critical about phishing, if I'm honest. It's not my favorite, you know, way of doing anything. I don't think it adds a huge amount of value in terms of what we do. However, I do think it picks up a couple of % of people we wouldn't elsewhere. And in a game where you're trying to not ratchet up by a % here and there, you know, it's something I wouldn't drop from the work I do. I think it has more benefit than it annoys people. I know some people actually get a kick out of it. You get a lot of people who are quite happy to report it, you know.
Someone else, and they kind of help me highlight. So I'm like you. I think it's a big pile of shite, to be fair, French mostly. Because anyone will be tricked by it. So it's a little bit of an indicator of where your organisation's going, but a well-crafted phishing mail will trick people in the security team, right? So it's not necessarily that awesome, but it's one of the stats that boards like. So in terms of kind of your reporting, so if you're a senior person in security, it's a good reporting metric that execs and boards seem to appreciate, and showing that you're gradually getting better at that is kind of an indicator for them that your awareness and culture stuff is working. So love it or hate it, it seems to go down well as a reporting metric, if nothing else. So it does have some benefit. Yeah,
I don't report in case it, you know, because some of the what's this mean? It's like, well, you know, it doesn't mean very much, does it? You know, but I actually kind of, the value I see from phishing is that it's another part of just a general awareness toolkit. Like I don't, you know, you might get a 1 or 2% of people changing behaviors. I think a lot of people who pick up on it do enjoy sending it back. They do enjoy repeating it. They kind of go, haha, caught you. And it's like, look, if it gives people a sense of accomplishment and that they're doing something security, even if it's not massively changing behaviors, but if it has a slightly favorable outcome in terms of the perception of what we're doing, you know.
Yeah, one of my favorite measures along those lines is what I call the harassment index. So basically how much my team gets harassed by people in the business. Harassed is probably the wrong word, right? Because we want them to talk to us, but the more my team say people come to us, the more examples I have of someone asking us about something before they do it, that for me is my favorite metric in terms of culture, because that's actually a provable demonstration that people are coming and talking to security when they don't have to. It's not an instant, hey, we're going to do this next month. What do you think of that? Or we want to transfer this data. How can we do it? That's one of my favorite metrics for how successful I'm being in kind of getting that engagement.
I think someone who does a fair amount of phishing campaigns, I think there is some benefit, but you're absolutely right. It's part of a toolkit. It's not going to show massive improvement. What it might show you is, okay, if this is a real world ransomware attack, this is possibly going to be something to worry about. But or if you're worried about credentials phishing, or if you're worried about the kind of whaling type attacks and things like this, it might show a weakness in process. But from a kind of awareness and education process, it's what you do with that information. How do you engage people? How do you kind of improve it moving forward? Is obviously what's quite important. And you can, like I said before, you can do like 3 different phishing campaigns and get a completely different set of people clicking on the links or downloading the documents. So it's what's anyone can be phished. That's the mechanism. It's just how bad would that particular scenario be if it was a real world scenario. I think is kind of the key thing. So I think it's a useful tool as part of a much broader set of tools that you would use. But if it's your kind of sole measurement factor in your kind of resilience, then you've probably got some gaps.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to be in agreement. General consensus around phishing tests is they don't work well, particularly if users are aware that they're going to be tested and things. But we recognize particularly phishing as a real challenge, because in surveying a lot of CIOs, when we did a Wall Street Journal survey recently, 100% of CIOs believe a breach will occur through a successful phishing attack. So even though we don't think it's a good gauge for necessarily measuring the maturity of our business, it has its place, at least from teaching people how to engage with this and how to be aware that it could happen. But from my perspective in the work that I do on innovation, we do a lot of research into human behavior to understand why and how users behave in certain situations, including with emails. So we look at why a user is compelled to click on a phishing link, and also ways to challenge a user about taking that action. So such as if you actually put a pop-up saying, this is likely to be a phishing link, or are you sure that you know this user, are you sure you want to take this action? That break in the flow can actually make the user really think about what they're doing. And when we've tested when people have been challenged, 70%, that's not 100%, but 70% of users do not click on the phishing link if challenged, because they think about it.
Can this raise another element? Because I saw recently some statistics where a very low number of people actually clicked, a relatively high number opened the email, a low number actually clicked through, but the number that came back and said, hey, I have been receiving phishing emails, was like 6% or something ridiculous like that. Can it help highlight that kind of problem as well, that there's a problem of backward communication back to the security team, if you like?
Isn't that a
Kevin?
general question?
Oh, Audra, there you go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm just checking. General question.
Yeah, yes, whoever.
Kevin, I think you spend a lot more of your time phishing people.
I think that's a great thing, and it I guess there is always that I guess to Killian's point around apathy, right? So even if you spot it, are you going to report it or just delete it? And I guess maybe kind of the usability thing, if there's quite a lot of easy plugins where you can just click report spam or report phishing.
Yeah.
So have we made it really easy? Does the person have I've worked in places where the instruction is, if you think it's phishing, forward it to the security team, including attachments, or copy or save it. And there's often kind of really weird instructions. And if it's just a little clicker thing, so all you do is suspect phishing, click, that might get a higher thing than go and do something else. So have we made it really easy for people to report it? And that's and again, I guess back to the kind of the metrics around that. As an example, we recently had an email from our people team that people weren't expecting, and it was totally legit, but it wasn't maybe formatted quite as well as it could have been. and we had a few people reporting it as, was it phishing? And I was like, that's really cool because it's not a phishing, but it looked slightly suspicious and you didn't expect it and you reported it. So that's a super win, even if there's only a few people. But yeah, I think it comes back to the please, having that culture of please let us know, and really kind of living that we want you to talk to us culture, and making things as easy as possible for people. So it's one click, not anything. I think about, who do I send it to? Is it phishing at Justy or security at Justy or whatever your company is? It's just click this.
I think as a social engineer who does a lot of this stuff, not just the phishing stuff, but some of the other kind of forms, I want to be challenged. So if I'm obviously not broken into any buildings recently, so that makes it quite difficult, right? But yeah, I want to be challenged. You know, I obviously don't actively look for it, but I like it when I am, because it shows that, you know, this is a real world scenario. Someone is going to challenge me. Someone is going to ask questions, or, you know, good, you have a pretext for that and you can kind of get past it in some cases. But where you can't, that's good. It shows that there are controls. Of course, like everything, when you're dealing with humans, it's not a measurement of success or failure. It's a measurement of, in this particular scenario, and a real attacker would be challenged if they met someone else who hadn't had the appropriate training. Would that actually be the case? You have to keep testing and kind of testing all different scenarios. So I think, you know, as long as your baseline of, you know, measurement of people that report is going up in every, you know, you want the genuine phishing emails to be reported, not the test ones, right? You want the genuine phishing emails. You've got a good level of reporting, a good level of engagement with the business, and you're seeing an uptick in that, and you're seeing much greater reporting. Then that's only a good thing, right? Obviously, it's not something to feel comfortable about, because it's always the one that slips through. But, you know, it's good. It'll show that if someone does come across it and it's slightly less targeted, or maybe there is an error and someone picks up on it, it gives the organization time to respond. And that's what we really want in that scenario, is the time to respond, reduce that time to respond, so we can actually react and lock it down. And I get involved in a whole range of things where, you know, people have responded quickly, and from an instant response perspective, that's really helped. It's really helped kind of close that off quite quickly. So yeah, I think they're the kind of things that you want. And like Kevin said, the easier you can make it for users, the more likely is they're going to do it.
Yeah. So
I do think what Kevin said is absolutely key, because humans tend to flow like water, and they want to go the easiest way. And therefore, if you make it easy, people will do it. If you make it complicated, it won't happen. So I think that is a really key point.
So I have a final question for each of you. I'll do it turn by turn. Audra, I'm going to start with you. What is the one thing that you wish every user understood?
Okay. I think it's really that cybersecurity isn't just an IT problem. That's a fully fledged business risk that everyone in the business owns, and that there are only two constants in any business across all businesses, and that is people and data. So people should know that if they're given decent training and awareness, they can take proactive approach and be part of the protection of an organization, that they can actually challenge and question, and that they can be the front line of cybersecurity defense.
Killian, what's your take?
Oh, I'm still thinking. I think I would like to understand that I prefer issues to surprises. I want to know. You know, like, feel free to shock on me with stuff and the team with stuff. Send us too much. I mean, it might take time, but we'll read through it and pull out what's important. You know, there's no such thing as engaging too much. You know, that and the right email address to send things to. They'd be
Kevin, what about you? What's the one thing you wish every user understood?
Yeah, I think you're going to echo the others, right? Because it's like, as Stu will probably attest to, there's always going to be a way in. So if you always talk to us as early as possible with any new projects, because then we can build in that security by design stuff. I'd rather be asked about 30 projects and need to work on 3 of them than be asked about none and those 3 slip through the gaps, right? And we're never going to take off for reporting something that wasn't suspicious, or that was suspicious but wasn't an issue. And again, I guess to Stu's point around detection, right? The more people talk to us, and the quicker people tell us, if our tooling hasn't spotted it, then someone telling us is quicker is going to help us deal with it more quickly, right? So we won't spot everything with technical tools, so have that process in place and just you know who we are. Come and chat to us as much as possible, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, plus give us more money in my budget. Sorry.
Oh, of course, of course.
We missed that one out.
So I agree with what everyone said. So I won't kind of repeat those kind of points. I think my perspective is from a kind of user perspective is about the digital footprint element. Kind of doing myself out of a job here, but lock down your digital footprint from a user. If people can be aware of all the stuff that people like me can find. Obviously, I'm a good guy, but the bad guys can find in a relatively short period of time that can really lead to potentially some quite significant stuff. Then that's important. So if users just were aware of that, and how the amount of times I've been able to recreate a company badge because someone shared it on social media, it's amazing, right? So that kind of stuff is quite important. Although it's quite low from a risk perspective, probably quite low to a widespread cyber attack, but still these are kind of things which can lead to something significant. So be wary of what people are sharing, and actually lock it down as much as possible, so you don't make yourself a shop window for an attacker.
Yeah, lovely. Well, unfortunately, that is all we have time for this session. Thank you once again to our excellent panel for joining me. It's been a really insightful glimpse into the relationship between security teams and users, and how it can all be improved.